Thank you very much. Welcome to my garden. So today I will be speaking about bonsai. And first of all, I am in my garden and I'm holding my iPad with my hand. And I hope that I will not cause motion sickness to anyone. So I apologize in advance. Now, first of all, what is bonsai? And the word bonsai is Japanese for tree. It's a composite word with the words tree and tray. And really, this is an art in which material, either trees or bushes that lignify, are planted in pots for aesthetic pleasure. So the art of bonsai actually it's a very old art. It started in China, perhaps. I think the earliest record that we have is around the year 700, and since then it was then introduced by diplomatic contacts between China and Japan, and monks going to Japan. And in Japan, it was transformed from the original penjing or Bonsai, which is the depiction of landscapes in pots, into the art of bonsai, now already with a Japanese word to signify the art. And it really is an art that was greatly moved forward in Japan by the Japanese aesthetics and their craftsmanship. And since then, it evolved for many years, and around the beginning of this century, and much strongly after the Second World War with the American GIs, the army in Japan after the war, it was brought back to Europe and to the United States, and well, it exploded around the whole world. So what is bonsai really? And bonsai is an art. Bonsai is a science, is a mixture of horticulture and aesthetics. And here I'm slowly showing a few of my trees, but we'll talk about some of them in a little more detail. And so it's an interesting combination of art and science. It is also a way to become closer to nature, in a sense that maybe you cannot go to a forest, but you can bring a forest to your apartment. Of course, I have a garden with many trees. This is a Japanese maple. Another Japanese maple, a hemlock. And these trees, they can be, depending on the species, you can even have trees that you can keep inside your apartment with proper lighting and proper care. But it really is not something difficult. One goal that I want to give you, one accomplishment for today's seminar would be if I give you a sense that it's not something extremely difficult, something that you cannot do it yourself, because it is simple and easy. It's a tree that you have to water. It's a tree that you can shape, but there are different ways to do that. And so there are more complicated, more advanced ways, but simpler ways too. And it's also something that you could have a big tree like this. This is a large Larix laricina, in French, mélèze, a very important species in bonsai here in Quebec. But you can have, this is a Tuya occidentalis, what we know as Eastern white cedar, what you see in the hedges around houses. Now, this is a wild collected specimen, very old. But you can have very big trees, another large, or you can have small trees. This is a Japanese maple too. You see it's the size of my hand. And you could have even smaller trees. So size is something, the scale of what you try to depict with bonsai is something that you can manipulate and something that you can adapt to your interest or to your condition, to your situation. And you can have very small trees or you can have very large trees. This here is a ponderosa pine, Pinus ponderosa from the Western United States. And this tree is estimated to be around 300 years. Now, as a bonsai, this tree is in training. So we call it in training when we are shaping it and making it conform to the form that we want. This is only in training for a couple of years. But this tree is about 300 years old. This one here, another ponderosa pine, is about 150 years. So what is in training? We use different methods to train trees. So for example, here, you can see on this juniper, this is a garden center juniper. This is a tree that costs perhaps $20, not an expensive collected old tree, but we can manipulate it to look old by creating dead wood that didn't exist before. We can manipulate it, application of wire, so that we can bend the branches and put them in the position that we want. And we can, with scissors, cut and manipulate the growth. I will show in a moment how to do that. So the important thing about bonsai is this training, this manipulation of the rate of growth of a tree. And when a tree is in a container, and it doesn't have to be ceramic, it could be also a slab, for example, like this one. We have here a Tuya occidentalis from a garden center, Eastern white cedar, on a slab made of cement, out of cement. Or this one here, which is a forest of buckthorn, which is an invasive species here. So all of these are seedlings that are removed from my garden, and they are grown on a natural rock. And it's already in training for about 4 years, this one. And as a tree grows with a restriction on the root system, so there is a limited amount of space for the roots to grow in, then this naturally leads to a slowdown on the rate of growth, as well as at times a decrease in the size of the leaves. So there is a miniaturization effect. And this control of the rate of growth is, and the direction of growth and the shape, this is what we call training of a bonsai. So let me show you a few of the trees in my garden, so you can have an idea of what can be done. This is a ginkgo tree, or actually 3 separate ginkgos. 1, 2, 3, and this one's connected to that. And ginkgos are one of the oldest trees that we have a fossil record for that still exists. So it's said to be a prehistoric tree. It didn't change, it didn't evolve much over time. So it has a very primitive vascular system. It's okay if you don't understand that for now. This is a mugo pine on a rock with the branches intertwined around the rock. Little juniper here, and a forest, another forest of tuyas, small forest of larch, few other larches. Many of these trees are in pots, but are to start accommodating or to start to have a domesticated root system in a bonsai pot or in a container, but they were not fully styled yet. Some were, some weren't. So when we speak of bonsai, of training of trees, it's the use of wire and the bonsai effect of the pot. But it is not just an old art that was greatly developed in Japan, but it's an art in itself. So imagine that you are a painter or a sculptor, but your sculpture changes all the time. So every year you have to come back and either add a new part, change something in the plant, in the painting, or something is no longer there in your painting, so you have to paint something else. So bonsai is an art with a living material, and it's an interplay between you and the tree. There is so much that I can do in terms of bending branches into position, so I have to work with the tree, with the growth habit of the tree. For example, this tree is a juniper, again, a garden center juniper, and it's growing very healthy now, very strong growth. So it's time for me to come and do new haircuts on this tree, and perhaps adjust the position of branches, perhaps follow in a different direction with a restyling of this tree based on the new opportunities that the new growth gives me. As you can see here, part of this tree was killed on purpose to create dead wood. Also, you can perhaps notice that there is a difference in level. This tree was actually in a different angle. I only have one hand free, but it was perhaps growing more horizontal like this, and I decided to change the angle. So you have a lot of artistic freedom when working with a tree, and at the same time you have to work with the tree, and it's something that is always changing. This is a juniper from here. It's called Juniperus communis, a common juniper, in a pot on which I have thyme, creeping thyme growing, and you can see the natural dead wood of the tree. This interplay between life and dead is a very important concept in bonsai, and is something that gives a lot of character to the tree. This tree here is perhaps 150 years old. It's a larch, was recently styled. So in this case here, the idea that I had was to have one apex here and another apex here. And there is actually a third one at the back that is barely visible. So when I style a tree, I can have an image of what I want to represent. It could be a tree with a unique artistic shape. It could be a cascading tree, for example, like this one, which is also a Tuya occidentalis, eastern white cedar, in a cascading form. So you can imagine that this is a very abstract representation of a tree growing on the edge of a cliff. In this case, I also added copper tubing together with the dead wood to create sort of mixed media, or what's the word? Not robotic, but when you have an artificial appendage, and that gives a nice effect. So you can represent a different ways that trees grow, like as a cascading tree, or for example, this maple, like a grand old tree in the middle of a field. And why does it look old? Because of the root base. As you can see here, we have roots spreading from the base. So this is called, in Japanese, the word is called nebari, the root base, or the root flare. And the wider it is, the more of a sense of stability this gives. This tree here, for example, it's planted as if it was on the edge of a lake. So imagine that what you don't see, the negative space here, is actually the water of a lake. These are the rocks on the edge, and you have this tree that is slanted and almost falling into the water with this very strong root holding it in place. Now, the reason why I did this, because I saw that there was a very strong root only on one side and nothing on the other. So I had to adapt and plant this in a way that would work with the tree to increase the aesthetics. This is a forest here, so you can see here inside of it, and it's still in training. So we need to keep training it, keep increasing the ramification, and so on. So I don't know if there are any questions at this moment before I continue. Any questions? So I don't know if I can unmute people, or
I will be able to unmute them if I see any raised hands.
Okay, so there are no questions at the moment. Okay.
No, not yet.
Okay. So what kind of species can we have? As you can see, I have an extensive collection, and the question that immediately comes to mind is, how did you receive the old trees? Okay, so Nadine is asking, how did I receive the old trees? So, for example, this ponderosa pine was collected in the United States by someone who gets a permit, collects and sells trees, and I had to import it. That one too. So these are imported trees. This is a tree that I bought from someone here who didn't want it anymore, so I bought it from someone. This was collected from my front garden. It was growing there. This I bought from someone else, another bonsai practitioner here. There are trees here that I bought in garden centers. This one here is an old collected tree that I collected myself. So there are certain places and certain situations in which you can collect trees from the wild. And there is a word in Japanese, a Japanese word for it in bonsai called yamadori, meaning from the mountains, or wild from the mountains. This tree I collected myself. Many, if not most, I collected myself. Those two here. This is a jack pine. Not fully styled yet. I collected here at the Falaise Saint-Jacques. This tuya here It's a very old tree that I collected myself. So you have to learn how to collect to be able to do it without endangering the tree. But very often these trees are trees that are in very isolated places and in very harsh conditions. This tree is barely alive. Where's my finger? Yeah. The 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 trunk is hollow. This tree was in the wild, just barely surviving. By removing it from the wild, putting it in a pot, not only do I increase the awareness of the beauty of the natural world to people that come visit my garden, or to people that go see this tree in an exhibition. For example, we will have an exhibition in October. I think it's the 25th of October at the Cote-Saint-Luc library. So you may be able to see some of these trees in person, but also by removing it from the wild in an ethical way, I am increasing the chances of survival of many of these trees that would otherwise be destroyed by pests or by fire, or simply never serve as an ambassador for the natural world to people that live in cities and don't usually have access to such natural beauty of crazy shapes that trees can grow in the wild, away from what we normally see in cities, which are very well behaved trees. So I hope that answers Nadim's question. And if it doesn't, please speak up again. So as a summary, you can collect trees. The oldest trees often will be collected. And nature did 90% of the work on making something beautiful out of a tree. And then my goal is to keep it alive and just enhance it a little bit, or remove a bit of the noise and of the randomness of nature and putting some more abstract beauty on it. But you can also grow bonsai from seeds. You can also buy garden center material. Like I mentioned, these junipers here are the case. You can collect young trees like this crab apple and eventually grow it. This tree will be grown on a style which is called literati, which is a style of bonsai in which you have very, very sparse foliage, very elegant, long, gentle curves with sparse foliage. It's a style of bonsai invented in China by the intellectual aristocracy. So something light and elegant was something seen favorably. But as you can see, I have a large collection, and it's sort of an obsession. And you have to be careful if you start in bonsai not to go this way unless you want to. But what do I do with these trees in winter? How do they survive our very harsh winters? So most of these trees are trees that are local from here. Local from here meaning they grow naturally in our weather. So this larch or this tuya. In the winter, I simply put them on the ground, and when the snow comes, it will cover them, and they will stay covered until the next spring, and that's it. This Japanese maple is not a species that can survive our winters, so that I have to protect during winter in my cold greenhouse, which is my porch that I keep it with a thermostat just above freezing throughout winter. There are trees, for example, this maple here, which is also Japanese maple, blood good variety with a beautiful trunk and a nice wide nebari, a base, giving it the impression of age. Now these trees, this, and the two maples at the distance that I showed you earlier, they were actually growing here. So they were growing here for about 35 years and I collected them. I collected them 3 years ago and only this spring they were put on their first bonsai pots and they are starting their life as a bonsai. Now this is a Japanese maple species that was for 35 years living in this garden on the ground. So one difference is that when the tree is on the ground, the roots are protected under the soil and it's much warmer, just a few inches under the surface than it is on a pot on the ground. So although this is a tree that could survive winter if it was planted in the ground, when it is on a pot, even if the pot is on the ground on winter, it's already too much cold for the root system and for the twigs that grow to resist winter. So these maples I have to protect in winter. There are also species, for example, like this one. This is a tree from New Zealand called Coprosma kirki, in dire need for a haircut. But this is something that cannot resist the winters outside, and I keep them inside with lighting at 21 degrees throughout winter. This is a natal plum, Carissa, and this is also a tropical tree, so I have to protect it during winter. Ligustrum, growing as a cascade, also have to protect in winter. So some of these species, perhaps this one here, and a few others that I don't actually own, like a ficus, for example, these are trees, these are species that you can keep in your apartment all year long. So depending on your condition and your interests and your lifestyle, you can have bonsai indoors all year long. This is a willow beginning to be trained. But you can have depending on your conditions, you can have certain species that you can keep indoor all year long. But the ideal condition, even for those that can be kept indoor, is to be kept outdoor during the growing season, during the summer when it's warm enough outside. So yeah, because I want to have a large collection and I don't have a large greenhouse, most of the trees I have are trees that are adapted to our conditions here and can spend the winter outside under the snow. Any other question?
No, you answered the last question.
Yeah, okay. So one thing I forgot to mention, I was talking earlier about the history of bonsai, and I mentioned that the earliest records that we have about trees grown in containers are from China around the year 700 current era, but I actually was wrong. I lied to you. Recently, it has been found in Masada in Israel that King Herod grew trees in pots. So there is archaeological evidence that what could be called somehow as a bonsai was grown in Israel several thousand years ago. So this is probably something that in Israel, King Herod did not have them for purely aesthetic beauty, as a I don't know if the concept of art existed, but as something to admire. King Herod probably had bonsai for fruit as a way of growing fruiting trees near or where he lived, but for all practical purposes, it could be said that the oldest bonsai records we have are from Israel, actually. Another thing that I always like to mention about bonsai is that to me, it has a very Jewish connection to it. The fact that we carry the roots with the tree carry the roots with itself. It's not attached to the ground. And that's a very Jewish concept throughout the centuries. Now, this tree here is a Japanese flowering apricot, a Prunus mume. And this is a tree that I have to protect in winter, but in the spring, it has the most fragrant flowers that you can imagine. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is this contraption here? Well, I am actually growing new roots here for this section of the tree. And so the actual bonsai here will be this. And it will eventually be trained. It's not being trained at the moment here, whereas this will create a new tree. Next spring, I will separate this and it will be growing with the roots that are being produced here. This is called an air layer. So I spoke a little bit about winter care. Depending on the species that you are interested, you can keep them inside, or depending on the species that you choose, you can keep them outside. So there are solutions depending on what you want to do and how you want to do bonsai. We have to water the trees every day, practically every day. And the reason why is one that I'll show you with an example here. So you can see here these little rocks. The bonsai don't grow, or rather we do not tend to grow bonsai in garden soil like you normally would buy on a garden center to plant your flowers. These are some special types of minerals that absorb water, and so they can release water to the tree when the roots need. But at the same time, it's very granular, and so it allows oxygen to pass. I hope it doesn't come as a surprise to you if I tell you that trees need oxygen, need to breathe. They produce oxygen from CO2 in the leaves, but the roots need oxygen to breathe, to respirate, like any other animal. Well, any other living organism, a higher organism. And so the roots need oxygen. And when a tree is growing on a very shallow container, we have to balance humidity and air. So here you can see some of the aggregate materials. In order to balance water and oxygen for the roots to be healthy, we use these aggregate materials. If we were to use, for example, on a very shallow pot like this one here, garden soil, each time that we were to water it, it would be very humid and very damp, and then it will take a long time to dry, and then it will be very dry. So instead we use these aggregate materials, and here you can see some of them also, which allows us to water it more. We have to water it more frequently, but the root system has more oxygen at the same time. And we also have to fertilize. So you can see here some of this dark stuff is organic fertilizer. So we have to fertilize, we have to water, we have to train the tree, and it seems a lot, but it's not actually. If you want to have a bonsai in your house, the most important thing that you need is to be able to water it regularly. And if you know that you're going to travel, well, I would say take it with you as if it was a pet, but not really. You should have someone come and water it for you on a regular basis. Regular meaning at least checking it every day if it needs water. So is it wet? Yes, it's okay then. If it's dry, needs water. And often it needs water once a day. So for example, I have friends that have bonsai and may want to leave them with me when they will travel. So I take care of them during those days. Or when I travel, I have someone that knows how to water my bonsai to come over and water them for me. Really, the one thing that you need to do with a bonsai is to water it. And the second thing is to train it. Now, there are different people in the world. There are people that want to become quite proficient and as a painter and be a painter and make their own paintings. And there are people that want to have a painting in their house and they enjoy the art. So there are also people that have bonsai and everything that a bonsai needs, they will come to someone like me or another person that knows how to deal with bonsai, and that person will do the work for them. But then they will take the tree and their only obligation would be to water it. So we spoke about bonsai, about how to care for them, how to keep them in winter. I want to show you a little bit about the tools, and then we will discuss a bit of training with these two examples, okay? So first of all, some of the tools. Let me move this here so I can see what I'm showing you. So here we have a concave spherical cutter. Often these tools are made in Japan, and this is something that we use to cut branches. I have a bigger one here for bigger branches. This one is straight edge, not spherical. Pruning scissors, one of the most important tools. But as you can see, it's a pair of scissors. So if you want to start bonsai, you don't need to spend hundreds of dollars with bonsai tools specifically made for bonsai. You can start with a normal pair of scissors, plier, wire cutter, and but this, as the tools that you can see here, are only perhaps my most frequently used tools, and I have another tool roll, a very heavy one. So I have maybe 30 kilos of tools. I don't know. There are tools for everything. Tools for cutting the roots. Tools for carving. This is for carving spoons, but we use it for carving dead wood. Chopsticks to repot, for example. A smaller branch cutter, concave cutter. A medium concave cutter. I showed you the large one. This is called a knob cutter because it sort of is spherical here. So when you cut something, it creates an indentation in the tree. There are tools for everything, but you don't need to start with everything. You don't need to have more than a normal pair of scissors. And depending on what style of training you take, you don't need more than that. So for example, here we have a little tree, which is a cotoneaster planted on a concrete slab, geometric concrete slab that I made myself. And this has a little bit of wire, as you can see, that I style it at first, and I should check if the wire is not starting to be eaten by the branch. So we say that the wire is biting, but we can train this tree without any wire simply by pruning in a directional manner to keep and to force the tree to grow in a direction that we want. So I'll show you this now. And afterwards, we will discuss this tree, which is a Grevia occidentalis, a tropical tree, if I'm not mistaken, from South Africa, which has very beautiful purplish flowers. I think it's called lavender star, the flowers. And this tree, I repotted it today. It was earlier this morning on this pot, and then I wire it, but I didn't change the position of any branches because we will do this together in 5 minutes. So in terms of directional pruning, if we see here, and it's very difficult for me to know where to cut. You can see here that you have one leaf here and one leaf there. If I cut here, if I cut there, this will stimulate growth from here and from here. So I'll have 2 new branches. So depending on the position of the leaves that I leave, I can style my tree, and I can directionally tell that don't give the tree no choice but to grow in the direction that I want it to grow. And so this is directional pruning. So simply by, for example, here, if I want a branch to go here, if I want a branch to grow upwards, I cut it here, and most likely this will turn into a branch and start growing upwards. Whereas if I want branches to grow laterally, then I cut here, and branches will be produced at the base of each of these leaves where there are buds underneath that you cannot see yet. So this is called directional pruning. And by pruning the growth, we stimulate, or rather we stop inhibiting the internal growth, and we direct it to grow in the direction that the final leaves are. This is called directional pruning. So now, if I may ask the host to show the little video that I prepared earlier. It's a 3-minute video in which I show the work that I did on this tree earlier, from that pot to this pot in the new angle and the wiring. So please go ahead and share the video if you can, or let me know if it doesn't work.
Would you be able to answer one question before I play the video?
Sure.
Nadine is asking, typically, how long is the wire kept in place?
So the wire is kept in place for as long as you can until it starts biting, and when it starts biting, meaning that the branch is starting to grow around the wire and it leaves a mark. But typically for a tree like this, it will stay on for 6 weeks maximum, and then the branch will already lignify in the new position and stay in place. But for other trees like conifer, like a juniper or like a pine, it may stay over a year or even more. Yeah, so there is no set time. It's as long as you can keep it before it starts marking your tree. Because ultimately what we want with the bonsai is to create an image that looks natural. Maybe very artistic, or it may look like an old tree in the field in miniature, but we don't want, well, unless we do want, for example, I'll tell you that in a moment, but in general, we don't want to be seen that it was manipulated by men. When do we want to? For example, in that tuya with the copper tube as a branch, I did it on purpose. Of course, I want that to be noticed. But in any case, the wire marks are more like how we train it, so we don't want it to be seen. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. I'm gonna try to share the video.
Okay.
Are you able to see it?
Yeah. In this time lapse, I want to give you an idea of what does working in bonsai, creating a bonsai involve. So I'm cleaning this little tree here to remove dead stubs, and now I am wiring it. Normally I would place each branch in position as I wire them, but because we will do this together in a moment, right now I'm just applying the wire throughout. As you can see, I use different gauges of wire, and I pair different branches together so that I can move them without breaking anything. This process normally takes, this process took me this morning about 20 minutes, but here we're watching it speed up, of course. That I finished wiring, I'm starting the repot. First I remove the moss that I will reuse, and now I am first I untied the tree from the old pot and I removed it, and now unfortunately it's a bit off camera here, but I am using a chopstick to release the roots from the bound state in which they were, and now I place some substrate in the new pot. I attach the tree with wire, and I'm adding substrate all around and using the chopstick to compact the substrate. The roots need water and oxygen, but they cannot have air gaps within. So this is the final result, and I hope it was a little bit instructive. Okay, so here we have the tree as it was left. If you paid attention, this tree was planted sort of like this on the previous spot. Is it on the screen? Yes. So it was planted like this, and I changed the angle. So now we have this cascading branch, and we have the apex of the tree here. And now I will manipulate the branches to make it look more beautiful. So for example, this branch here, I want to move it forward. And this branch here, I want to move it to cover a little bit the gap in between. So here we have one of the branches. This one here can perhaps come a little closer. This one here can come here like so. We'll bring this one down here a little bit. This one here. And so this is all the artistic part of it. And whatever vision of the tree that you have in mind, you can see we can manipulate quite drastically. Here. So something like that. So you see a big transformation. There is still a very big gap here that will eventually be covered by whatever this grows. So this is the first step, or the first step in this iteration for this tree. And as it evolves, this little branch here will grow and occupy this space, and towards the front and towards the back. So we have this sort of design for the tree. So you can see in just 4 minutes, while the wiring took longer, and of course, it takes time to learn to wire and all the other techniques that you need to learn. Just a moment, I don't like this very straight line here. Let's do like this. Yeah, better. So I like the result. Now, this only took a few minutes. Now, over the next weeks, I will be checking the wire to make sure to remove it when it's time, before it starts biting. But if you don't like to wire, you can simply do directional pruning, as I was earlier showing on that other tree. So here we have a little bonsai that we changed the angle, we restyled it to make to make it more beautiful. And of course, it will evolve now with time. And that's it. Before opening the video for more questions, I want, let me turn here so you can see that and me. So before opening up for the final questions, I want to say that if you're interested in learning bonsai, you can contact me, and I teach privately as well as in groups, or there's plenty of information online. I have a YouTube channel where you can see a lot of the techniques that I try to share, what I learned throughout the years. Or there are also bonsai clubs in Montreal, the Société de Bonsai Beijing de Montréal also offers courses. And online in YouTube, you'll find a million sources for learning bonsai. But if you're interested to learn more, contact me. In October, we will have me and a few friends of our study group called the Progressive Bonsai Collective. We will have an exhibition at the Cote-Saint-Luc library. But this is the time to learn if you want to start this year with at least with tropical trees. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I hope you'll have a better appreciation for things that often we pass by without noticing, the trees in our environment. And with bonsai, you can bring them to your home to have a little bit of zen, a little bit of connection with nature, caring for a living being. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed. So now we have 3 more minutes, and if there are any more questions, please go ahead.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How did you get interested in doing bonsai?
That's a good question. Many people start in bonsai after they watch the film Karate Kid. That was not the case for me. I got interested in bonsai because I was always interested in unusual things. I'm married to a redhead. And one day, as I was doing my postdoc in Cambridge in the UK, I walked into a used bookstore and found a bonsai book and read it and said, one day when I have my own garden, I will start. And so just over 6 years ago, I started. I rediscovered the book that I had forgotten in my bookshelf, and I started. And since then, I've been studying it obsessively. So just like a tree in a pot may look like an old tree, but it's not necessarily a 300-year-old tree, but a 20-year-old tree. The study of bonsai also, if you do it aggressively enough or obsessively enough, 6 years is like 6 dog years. So I've been doing it as professionally as I can and as much as I can since I started just over 6 years ago. Any other questions?
Thank you very much for that answer. I don't see anything yet, not in the chat or no raised hands.
So just to reiterate, if you want to learn bonsai, get in touch. It can be as much or as little work and effort as you're willing to put on it. The only essential thing is that you water your tree and you enjoy it. The watering is not a chore, but actually a moment to look at the tree and see what it needs and think about the shape and enjoy it.